half a day on it yesterday. Talk to the death.
I guess, are there any questions?
Yeah, so are there any questions that haven't already been asked? There are none. So I just want to...
Sorry. It's 2 minutes to 1, so she's probably...
2 minutes to 1.
Lunch break. I can take some notes.
I know you delegate it, but it's still your job.
I just want to go, these recommendations and the recommendations that we've put into the LTP are essentially that we have funded Hawke's Bay Tourism at 1.8 million and that we drop that back by $300,000 every year for the next 3 years, which will get it back to where the funding originally was. There's been huge discussion in our community about this, and we spent half a day on it yesterday. I'll just pause while the boys have a little chit-chat. Half a day on it yesterday, and the chairman of Hawke's Bay Tourism, George Hickman, put up a proposal which recognised that they do need to look internally on how they were going to fund their organisation. He talked about the importance of the organisation, and his proposal was that we do have the first drop of funding back to 1.5 million, but we leave the 1.5 million there for 3 years whilst they look at ways of doing finding new funding for their organisation. And that some of that may have to be legislation, and there are lots of other ways which I think some of our councillors are quite close to. And then subsequent to that, he didn't say so, but I think the presumption was that we then make the subsequent drops. That's his proposal. What do councillors think about that? Councillor Bevan.
Chair, mindful of that and the need to give Hawke's Bay Tourism some certainty about its future support for from the Regional Council, I've drafted some resolutions which I'm happy to move, which I've given to Leanne, so I can go up on the board there, which incorporate that plus one or two of the other concerns that were raised during the course of our discussions with the tourism industry.
Okay, if council's happy, we'll put Peter's thoughts up, his resolution up, and we'll have a discussion around that. Is council happy to take that? So it's based on George's.
It is, yeah. So 1 and 2 are as per the staff recommendations here, and then the balance.
Ian, can I get you to share, please? Sorry.
So the papers in front of us talk about 1.5 mil, or currently 1.8, but as I understand it, it's actually 1.82. Is that correct, Jess? Yeah. So my resolution 1 is actually 1.52 for that reason. So what I'm proposing is that we have 1.52 for the 18-19 year, and then confirm that we will continue at that level for the first 3 years of the LTP. But in the meantime, I'm suggesting that Hawke's Bay Tourism examine levels of accommodation in private homes achieved through hostings websites to recommend to us possible differentiated rating levels for accommodation providers based on occupancy rates, which is the recommendation that George put in front of us yesterday. 4, request that HBRC staff work with Hawke's Bay Tourism to investigate the possibility of introducing a bed tax via enabling legislation to support the activities of Hawke's Bay Tourism. 5, invites Hawke's Bay Tourism to consider how it can better support Hawke's Bay Maori tourism. And 6, encourages Hawke's Bay Tourism to actively support the Living Wage Initiative amongst its members. So
Thank you,
I'm
Peter.
happy to move that.
Can I just put, before you do,
Yes. Yes.
I just wonder whether you could consider a couple of wording changes.
Yes, I'm happy to consider that. I was going to make that offer, yeah.
In the first instance, Mr. Chair, I wonder whether we could consider, where is it, confirms the proposal as 1.2 for the, sorry, under 2 confirms that the rate of 1.52 be retained for the first 3 years of the LTP, reducing to the levels as set out in the long-term plan from year 4.
That I had the same question as to whether your intent, Peter, was in number 2 to be saying that the 1.5 would continue for 3 additional years from the first year, which is 218-19.
No, it's the first 3 years of the plan.
Total
it's a
3.
total, yes.
Total 3.
Correct.
so
Yes.
are you shaking your head? Why are you shaking your head?
Well, what I was hoping was that the industry would come up with a council of a new formula, and we might come up with a formula and a process and other issues that we might wish to maintain at 1.5, because what the industry does and others get leverage off to do that. I'd like to wait and see what it comes back with before making a decision, rather than here now. Leave it open, you with me? I just think it would be a sensible thing to do.
You happy to leave it open, Neil?
The only difficulty I have, where I can appreciate your point, is that we need to send a very clear signal that the status quo is not what's required. We're wanting, things will change at that point. We require a significant contribution from the sector at that point.
As a response to Neil, I don't think there's any doubt at all with the tourist industry that things have already changed. All we're now working about is where to and for what. I think it's a really, there's been a bucket of cold, icy water thrown on all over. We're all shivering, and now we're figuring out how we're going to get ourselves back into this. And I just think to lock it down so tightly unnecessarily shackles us, where we might come up with a 1.5 because we're going to do this, 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 and this, and this. You with me? I don't want to say no.
Surely it's more appropriate to review in the next review of the long-term plan in 3 years' time.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, we'll put that in. Fenton,
Oh, no, he's going to take it out.
no, Neil's comes out and we put in Alan's suggestion, and Neil's agreed to that.
So we'll just put a full stop. We don't do that.
Fenton, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's important that, there's a contract about to be signed. I mean, the contract finishes on 30 June. Have I got that right? Yeah. So to have some certainty will be hugely important in this discussion. I don't think locking in any assumptions in year 4 are necessary at this stage. But I do think that the signal that sends that actually Hawke's Bay is still in the tourism game and don't count us out is hugely important. So I think the 3 years at 1.5 makes a lot of sense.
But
If we can get it there, of course.
Tom?
The plan will indicate, because it needs to, a 10-year. So I think the assumption, therefore, is that the years 4 through 10 of the plan would just be straight lined at 1.52. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm making an assumption that it drops back to
The plan.
to the plan.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that, yeah. The other thing.
Just to be helpful, Chair, actually, Councillor Curtin's right. It doesn't matter what goes in the out years because we go through this whole process again in 3 years' time. So, and what it does do is it does give the auditor some clear signal about where we intend to go, and the rate increases in the out years are then sort of factored in correctly. So, perhaps Councillor Curtin is right in putting that in now. Well, look, we have no idea what the next council's going to deal with at the time, but we do have to have something for the long-term plan for the auditor to have a look at, that this is our intention and this is our course of travel.
Yeah, that's why just straight item. So why don't we either we'll put in
Been too prescriptive.
Mr Chair, I wonder if I could make another suggestion at 3 as well, substituting the word request to requires.
the next long-term LGFA planning process.
No.
No, requires that Hawke's Bay return, yeah.
Require them, they're not our employees.
Through the next, the next LGP review. The next
21.
Number 3, Neil's talking about.
LGP review.
18, 19, 20, 21.
So Neil wants to put, instead of request, requires. Leanne just said we can't require them because they're not, they don't work for us, but we do, they kind of do.
Or EPIs?
Leanne.
I just think requests is a politer thing to say than require. And I just think it's respectful. They're an independent body. We ask them to do such a, that if they simply say no, they know they'll get what the reaction will be.
Well, we've requested them for 3 years. What could happen?
With respect, we haven't. No, we haven't. We've muttered and mumbled, but we haven't requested them. The council hasn't.
Well, you're all behind the plate, aren't you?
We could certainly make something of that nature, though, a condition of the contract with them.
Well, that's fine. Look, I think it needs to stay as.
I think it needs to stay as requests because, as you quite rightly point out, they're an independent body and we should not be instructing them to do this. They will get the message.
Okay, was a thing for request.
Not. And the other thing I'd just say to Councillor Curtin, Kiwi psychology is if you go and tell a Kiwi to do something, they won't. Ask a Kiwi to do something and they'll turn up with 10 of the mates and do it.
We're looking
That's where
for
we are.
consensus here. Is there anybody else got any problems?
Yeah.
Number 5.
So number 5, I'm not sure whether the intent is specifically to be a reference to the organization of Hawke's Bay Tourism, or whether it's a general statement about supporting small T.
Okay, so my intention was general, so turn that into small t, that's correct.
Can we change invites to request then, to be polite?
No, that was invitation. No, to take on Neil's point, I would say invites Hawke's Bay Tourism to better support Maori tourism in Hawke's Bay.
Well, how do we know it needs better support?
We're getting quite a few niggles from lots of parties.
Oh, I think we got some pretty clear messages during the course of our submissions.
We got contradictory messages.
Yes.
We did.
Yeah, we did, but there were some concerns expressed.
A view from the board, and I don't have my colleagues here to talk about it, but we'd be very comfortable with that.
There.
I think it also sends a good message to those who've been critical
Yep.
from the Maori tourism
Yep.
sector.
That we've
about
heard
tourism.
them. Yeah.
We've listened to them, heard them, and doing something.
Seem to have consensus on 5. Number 6. I'm for that.
Can I say rather than support, promote? Support is relatively inactive, promote means
yeah.
go and do something. Yep. I promoted to do something. Yep. I promoted a birthday invitation to my place. Doesn't mean to say you have to turn up.
We'll be at the 70th round.
Okay. Who moved us?
I'm
Peter
moving,
did.
Chair.
We have a mover and a seconder. Do you wish to speak?
I do, briefly, Chair, because it is a subject, as you've quite rightly pointed out, that we've given a fair bit of airplay. And it's certainly, I think, from the submission process being the most controversial aspect of our long-term plan proposals. It was heartening yesterday, the discussion that we had with the tourism industry. I think they've made an effort to come to the party and start the hunt for alternative forms of funding, which is encouraging. It was also satisfying, really, that the proposal to reduce the funding has brought into focus the purpose and the function of the organisation itself and its place in tourism in Hawke's Bay, and it certainly caused the people who are involved in the tourist industry to quite carefully consider the history of local body support for tourism and whether we're now on the right track. And my sense of the submissions that we received is that there is quite widespread support for Hawke's Bay tourism, and there is a recognition of the competence of the people that are currently leading it. So I think we need to also come to the party as a council and give them some certainty about their future and give them time to get alternative forms of funding into place. And it is my expectation that the getting back to $1.8 million of support or even greater will be achieved prior to the 3 years, the first 3 years of the long-term plan being up. So I'm quite optimistic about the future for Hawke's Bay tourism, and I hope that they will see this as a fair compromise, and that we've listened to their submissions to us.
The net financial impact of this proposal is to reduce by half the reductions that we were otherwise proposing over the first 3 years of the plan. So we've effectively split the baby here on this in the spirit of compromise. If one were to discount for the moment the submissions that were identifiably from industry folks, I think the rest of the public sentiment about this matter would have been something like 3 to 4-1, reduce this contribution. It's not core business, et cetera, all the things we've read about in the submissions. So there's a substantial body of opinion out there that does feel that it's inappropriate to target this sector and so on. We've heard all of those arguments. Some of those feel those are pretty compelling arguments. So a compromise has been struck here. Nobody has ever questioned the value of marketing Hawke's Bay. My own view is that there, as opposed to 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, there are many more voices in Hawke's Bay who actively tell the Hawke's Bay story. Basically every exporter who is trying to create an aura of acceptability around its products, particularly in the primary sector, but even folks like Fernware and so on, everybody's out there telling a Hawke's Bay story these days. And it is about provenance and green and sustainability and so forth. So it's not only Hawke's Bay tourism that is carrying that ball. And so from that standpoint, I'm not terribly concerned that a reduction like this is going to injure our standing in the marketplace out there. So I think the industry has recognized this. I think it was good that they came in with this proposal because there have been a great deal of misinformation out there that was not prudently managed, let me put it that way, by the leadership of the local industry here as to what was being done here, why it was being done. You know, we had airports closing, we had all kinds of dire consequences. No one would be there to answer the phone when the reporter from San Francisco called up to say, I want to come to Hawke's Bay. There was pretty ridiculous statements made out there. And, but I think the proof is in the pudding. The leadership came back and said, we can live with this. We would like you to write a blank check, but we can live with this. And so we are where we are, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's the old saying, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, our partners at the Hawke's Bay Tourism certainly played their cards to the maximum in terms of the use of misinformation to create a smokescreen that somehow the sky was going to fall upon a reduction of $300,000 in their ratepayer subsidy. That was always nonsense. There has been a failure of governance in Hawke's Bay Tourism because they were given adequate notice of a short-term 3-year boost to funding from 1.5 to 1.8 million. They were given a clear message around that and failed miserably to engage with their stakeholders to acquire the appropriate funding. We had submissions from respective groups, for example, 100 odd wine growers, or we had 450 of the Napier Business Association members, we had 400 odd from Hastings, we had bed and breakfast representatives. You start to tally the numbers and they only need to make a small contribution each to make a significant dent in the funding required. So, Mr. Chair, it was disheartening to see a campaign being operated by the sector, funded, I'd say, by the ratepayer money itself, as opposed to those many other ratepayers who came to the party and said, this is not equitable. It is not equitable for one sector of the community to receive a subsidy of this nature. It's akin to those same subsidies which applied to the farming sector in the pre-80 period. There has to be an end to that. I think and hope that the message is picked up from the recommendation here today that this is a limited free ride, and that's what it is, a limited free ride for the sector, for the industry, for a 3-year period. I would say, Mr. Chair, in concluding, that this is by far and away our biggest partnership. Our biggest partner is receiving 1.5 million, 4.5 million over 3 years from the ratepayer to fund private businesses. Meanwhile, our much lesser partners, our Biodiversity Foundation and Future Farming Fund participants will receive a mere fraction of that to address core environmental issues. Core environmental issues receive a fraction in partnership support that we are affording the sector. Pleased to see a compromise worked, but it needs to send a very clear signal to the sector. It is your sector. Step up to the plate and fund it.
It's a point of order. I've realised in proposing this motion that I haven't dealt with the rating adjustment, and I'm not quite sure of the standing orders on this, whether I can actually offer an amended resolution to my own.
No, you have to resign your seat and stand for re-election.
Call me Barnaby Joyce.
Common sense it can go. I think.
Thank you, Peter. I'll just insert it.
Okay, so these words would be agrees to adjust the rating split to become more weighted to the commercial sector as consulted on, correct?
Yes.
What kind of standing orders provide for that?
As long as the secretary agrees.
Secretary agree?
Yes.
Okay.
The chairman makes a statement. And it was one claim.
Benjamin Disraeli, my...
We got that as well.
Thank you, Chair. There were three reasons why I considered it was worth putting the initial proposal out for consultation as we had it. Firstly was the reputation the industry has for paying low wages, and I'm pleased to see that we've asked Hawke's Bay Tourism to actively promote the living wage scheme amongst its members. The second one was I felt that we were basically subsidising an industry that they should pay their own way, and I think again the motion that's been put up is going to deal with that issue in the long term. But the third reason is that if we're going to be striking a rate for business development, that particular business or industry has to have some direct environmental benefit, and because to me that's where our core function is. So unfortunately, that's not something that's necessarily going to happen with tourism. They're not going to have a direct environmental benefit, but hopefully after a period of time, and if they're able to start funding their own way, then we can look at putting the business development rate towards other initiatives which may achieve that goal for me. So I'm happy to support the motions that have been put in front of us.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing really much to add other than this debate has been very good for tourism in Hawke's Bay. It has certainly sharpened the thinking. Leading up into this, as a board, we've been looking at, things that the accompanying things. So there's a new contract coming, and we're saying the KPIs need to change in 2018 as one example, because are they fit for purpose now? No, they're not. So I think the contractual, the next 3 years in the contracting will be quite important to, add a little bit more finesse to some of these recommendations here, and certainly give a clear and transparent signal back to the ratepayer that things are changing, and included in that is a desire for a means of funding this without having to go to mums and dads around the region. I get that. The challenge at the moment as it stands today is the only regulatory tool to insist on funding is the Rating Act. Every other industry, not everyone, but I can't name one that has a voluntary levy anywhere because frankly it wouldn't work. So there's no mechanical device in the background to leverage this funding directly. I mean, if there was a stroke of the pen in Wellington and RTOs had some ability to, some legislation behind them, this whole discussion would be quite different. But as it stands at the moment, it doesn't. We've supported it for 7 years or whatever, or longer, actually, in various forms. Everyone's had a go at this, and most of them have failed. This one's hanging in and is evolving. So let's keep an eye on it and make sure that we are going to get bang for buck in the future, and there is a way to leverage funds direct from beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. There's been some quite powerful truths said in this debate. Firstly, the observation made among others, Lawrence Sewell, that our previous experience in promoting tourism for Hawke's Bay has been a failure. That's true. It's also true that the Hawke's Bay tourism entity has been successful, no question about that. It's also true that it's been ably led by Annie Dundas, no question about that. It's also true that the staff have done a fine job, no question about that. This issue turns on who should pay. And I think one of the great things that's come out of this debate is it now has been a greater realisation by the far-flung parts of the tourism sector, wherever they may be, that there has been a substantial and powerful contribution made to their well-being by this council. And it was only when it was a threat did they come forward to say, we want this, we want this, we want this. So now we have a situation where we're going to re-look at our future. I don't agree with all of the things that happened in the 1980s under Roger Douglas, but one of the points he made was that if people get something for nothing, they don't value it. And that's what we had here. People got a fabulous service effectively for nothing, and I don't think they valued it. They now see what it is, and I think they're going to make a contribution in a way which will value it. I think the tourism industry in Hawke's Bay will be stronger and better for this, because we've reaffirmed that the structure is good, the leadership is good, that the funding is important, and we're going to improve and strengthen the base of that funding, and people will be committed to it because they will be making a contribution. It won't be free, it'll be a joint effort, and I think that's a really good thing. I look forward to an exciting future for tourism from this.
Thank you, Rick. Disraeli would have been proud of that speech. Alan.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased that a degree of logic and common sense has finally entered into this debate. But in fact, I'm going to vote against it because I believe this council has had and will have a very good value with a contribution of 1.8 million, with the industry's further contribution of $950,000 a year on top of that. I also have concerns about the living wage dictate, which I agree with in principle, but we don't do that with any of our other contractors, so why should we be picking out Hawke's Bay Tourism?
Perhaps, Alan, we should be doing it with all our other contractors.
Sorry?
Perhaps we should be doing it with all our
Well,
other...
maybe we should, but it should be a consistent policy.
Is there any other speakers? Otherwise, we'll go to the mover, Peter, to wind us up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Could you wind us up until we have the extra one too, just for formality?
Say again?
You've put in the extra one, so you've got 4 points now, haven't you? Or 5 points.
Oh, yes, but I don't intend to speak to that. So this, I think we've pretty much canvassed all of the range of views that can be expressed during the course of today. I'm sorry this is not going to be a consensus vote amongst the councillors. It was my hope that we could get there by putting up a resolution in draft form and wordsmithing it, and that's been quite a good process in my view. I think we're all cognizant of the problems of supportive tourism. It's incredibly hard to measure the success of the $1.8 million that we have invested to date in tourism. There's no measure yet been invented that can quantify how much it does contribute to the growth in tourism and how much is just organic growth. So that's a difficulty. As was pointed out to us yesterday, there is no single iconic feature in Hawke's Bay that will naturally draw tourists to this area. So we are a little bit off the beaten track, and that probably means we have to work a little bit harder to get that tourist dollar. And as someone else has pointed out already today, there's no real opportunity here to levy the tourism sector like the primary sector is able to do, for its members. So there are some significant inherent difficulties with this whole thing that I think we recognise, and that's why there is a tacit agreement amongst us that there is a level of support here for one particular industry that's not offered to others that are equally large employers in this region. So with those words, Chair, I look forward to the vote.
Thank you. So we have the renewed resolutions, which I think you're all aware of now, and Len hasn't been able to put them back up. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous, bar one. Disraeli would like that as well. No, we're just going to go through. We've got to do this.
And do this at the end?
Yeah, or not, maybe not. Then I might sneak it after smoke. We are going to go. James has been waiting patiently for this one. Item 14. So perhaps everybody's been talking about this too, and we should go straight to questions. I don't think we could linger on. I think everyone understands the issues here. James, do you? So you going to answer the questions, or is Jessica?
So just the only difference between options 2 and 3 here is the borrowing limit. There's no other liability implications or anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct. So option 2 limits us to borrowing up to 20 million from the LGFA. And I think somebody asked, it might have been you, Councillor Bevan, during the hearings over the last couple of days, one point that wasn't included in the paper was the quantum of savings that could be achieved through joining the LGFA, and actually based on some modelling, Manton's looked at it over the last couple of days, the cost savings on interest repayments is about $610,000 over the 10-year period. So that would be effectively the amount that we could save on our interest repayments.
But you can only go up to 20 million.
That's if we join as a guarantor, we have unlimited borrowing.
Yeah, but, no, it is...
Those savings would be on an unlimited basis.
Yes.
No, but
Not on the 20 million option.
on the 20 million, no, there's no... But on option that non-guaranteeing, you can only borrow 20 million.
Correct. We would then need to borrow from Commercial Bank for the rest of our forecast borrowing at a higher rate.
Paul?
Thank you, Chair. So I've got two questions. Our other alternative is to borrow from commercial banks. And from my recollection, which is going back a few years now, is that if when commercial banks borrow to councils who can rate, they commonly had a clause in there that they could take over the rating, the rates income as well. Would that be? Is that still current? I mean, I'm going back 20 years ago.
Yes, that's correct.
So the risk is the same in terms of the number of risks that were raised by different members of the public who came in terms of whether we borrow from banks or whether we borrow from the local government agency. They can still step in if things all turn totally to custard and play around with our rate, play around with our rating income.
That's right. So the LGFA would have, they would be able to recover via our rating if there was a default by another council who was a participant of the LGFA. That's the difference in terms of whether the bank would have security over our rating, future rating.
Okay, so so the risk, this is very similar risk. And the other one that was raised by one of the submitters was the issue that the guarantee is joint and several.
That's right.
I can't remember whether I asked that yesterday or the day before, whatever, for an explanation behind that. I mean, I know what joint and several is, that's for sure.
That means that we would agree to, we're underwriting all the other participants of the LGFA, although we would be allocated a percentage of our responsibility, which is based on our rate take.
So in other words, our joint and several liability is limited to the 0.37%.
Yes.
Okay, so yep.
I just sort of...
No, that's not right.
That's our percentage.
That's a several. That's several. Joint and several means they could come to you at any time.
Yeah, no, joint and several means that they can come to us for Auckland City Council's debt, but nevertheless, it's still, we're limited under that joint and several liability to the 0.37%.
By the side agreement, but I think the nuance in this is we are 100% liable for the default of a party, but everybody is 100% liable for it. So we're all 100% liable, but then we have an agreement about how to share it.
Yeah.
So the concern is, well, we're 100% liable for yes, we are, but so is the other council and the next council and the next council. The 54 councils are all 100% liable. It's a question of...
It's a nuance, yeah.
So we have a side agreement. I just need to understand this because I just want to make a point too. I thought, we had Fred coming in, and I read his, what you said about Fred here, and I thought it was disingenuous, really, because he said you made a point that we're a tax and borrower. That was his initial point. But his major point was not that, in fact. His major point was that we are securing and we're giving away our democratic rights because we're allowing power of attorney if there's a major default. We're allowing someone to come in. That was his major, and here's it is a constitutional question, but it's a really important one. So I need to understand this really, and so understand it a bit better even today with some of the questions today.
Which is my point, Chair. In terms of if we were to borrow from a commercial bank, they would end up with the same rights.
Just to us, though.
Yeah, just step-in rights, just to us.
Just to recover our
So the risk is whichever institution.
No, but that's to us, that's to our incompetency. What about if Auckland has, all the volcanoes blow up in Auckland, and these guys panic and they step into everybody around the country? You're saying, James, there's a side agreement which says the joint and several liability clause will be shared proportionately, equally, what?
proportionately by the size of our rate take.
Okay, so there's definitely a joint, I'd like to sign that myself. Because it's really important that, you know, you get in the joint and several, and I've been in a lot, and they come at one who can pay. Well, there's vicious bankers, they know it even better than us poor lenders. So, you know, I'm happy to support this, but I want to take in, has anyone talked to Fred and the other chap that came in and just explain that it's not as onerous as they think? Or do we think it's as onerous?
Well, there are a number of other participating councils who are...
Yeah, so, but is Fred aware that we have the side agreement?
Yes, he is, yeah.
He is, and he's still not happy.
I think his concern is that if there was a natural event which wiped out potentially a number of councils, that there would be a significant number of councils who couldn't contribute to the joint and several agreement to cover the debt.
Okay.
But they would have to default. So even if that event occurred, so say there was a Christchurch in Auckland, I don't think central government would let Auckland Council become insolvent, as they didn't let the councils. There would be other step-ins from central government. I mean,
all councils are required to borrow up to their own metrics as well. So
joint and severals and guarantees are always incredibly unlikely, and sometimes they happen. Fenton and then Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just describe, and commensurate with our rate take, are you talking about the general rate or everything?
Total rate take.
Total rate take. Okay.
Tom.
So the significance of this in savings is we're talking about borrowing $71 million over 10 years. If we did the non-guarantee, we'd borrow 20 of that at what fractional amount less money?
It's about 0.4%.
0.4%, so 40 basis points or something, right?
Yeah.
All helps.
Multiply that by 50 for my feeble brain here. So the
If you borrowed 50 million, it would be
200 grand over the a year. And how long is it going to take us to get to 71 million?
10 years. We're borrowing of 71 million over 10 years.
I forget what that graph looked like. We'll be there in 3 years or 4 years or whatever. I don't know.
We don't actually peak, we don't reach 71 million, that's the borrowing spread out over 10 years, so our borrowing peaks at about 38, I think, during that 10-year period. But the savings on repayments over the first 10 years is about 600,000 on interest payments.
You're happy? Well, I'll go with the banker. And you'll second. You're going to move the paper, which it's in the paper. As in the paper.
1, 2 and 3.
Yeah. Where is it?
Chairman, I don't think it's necessary to make a commitment to this fund at this stage. It would probably need a deliberate decision if we go into this commercial reforestation thing with major debt. But there's not major debt contemplated, certainly in the next 3 years. And I do have some trepidation about the additional risk that we expose ourselves to.
Thank you, Al. Any other speakers? Well, we reserve your right. Have you spoken yet?
Well, hang on, was
You haven't
part of
spoken.
the debate?
Yeah, we have a mover and a seconder, and you didn't speak first, Alan came in. You got to speak first, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I appreciate that taking up any guarantee is always a risk. However, I think the risk in this particular instance is low enough that it's worth taking in terms of the return, which is potentially 200 or 610,000 odd dollars, which is a significant amount for the council.
Peter, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, this proposal has actually caused more discussion and controversy than I was anticipating, I have to say. I take comfort from the fact that the banker to my right, or the ex-banker to my right, has moved this motion. I also take comfort from the fact that this fund has existed for a large number of years and there has never been a default under it. And I also take comfort from the fact that even if there was a default, the exposure of the council is relatively limited, and it would take a disaster of Holocaust proportions for us to be exposed, and I would anticipate that the government would step in such a case in any case. So I think the risk to this organisation and to our ratepayers is somewhat minimal, and certainly is justified by the savings that we can make.
Yeah, I just would note, I don't recall ever having heard that what the actual savings to the council would be from adopting this. And I don't remember anybody commenting on that in the submissions or anything else, but it seems significant enough savings to be worth the tiny risk handle involved. So I'm supporting it.
I'd just like to thank, I wasn't here when you gave the figures out, Jess, I'm sorry to take a phone call, but that was the issue I raised with the presenter on this, to say, well, there is an opportunity cost here, so if we don't do this, what is the cost to council? And what is the cost to councils across the country? You know, I thought, given that the advice you'd given us that we get a preferred rate for this, well, it would be substantial. This is another case of the person is right in that giving a guarantee, there are all these other things that come with it. But if we're to live our lives defending ourselves against these extreme risks, we would never get out of bed in the morning because we'd be worried about being hit by a passing meteorite or snatched by a passing alien vessel. So there's always risk. Life is about risk. And I think $600,000 worth of savings is a justified risk. On the other side of it, which he didn't make the point, was although people have these powers, they are reviewable. And if someone exercises powers and stepped into this council in the way in which the submitter outlined, well, then we could go to the High Court and get that changed, in my view, in very double quick time. They have to be reasonable, proportionate. So I feel perfectly safe, perfectly happy with what we've done here, and I think the savings are well worth it. We should identify them sooner, I think. Thank you.
Any other speakers? I'd just like to say that I think Fred and the other chap have done a wonderful job bringing the risks to our mind. However, I'm convinced by Councillor Bevan's argument, principally, and the fact that Paul is actually moving this, so I will go with it. Are there any other speakers? Put the motion as it stands. Aye. Against? Alan, are you against? Alan's against. It's carried. Thank you. 16. Oh, we're racing this along here, James. Just keep pushing along. Okay, we're up to item 16.
Chair, I'm happy to be guided. Do you want me to make any comment or just go straight to questions?
I think everyone's read it. We'll go straight to questions. Tom?
My question is, in item 6, there is a discussion of this idea that was floated of a regional park at Tatira, and the staff consider that has merit. So in the recommendations, is that deserving of note, or can we take that as implicit in accepting the recommendations as written, which simply say that we will consider the submission points?
Happy to be guided. I mean, talking to Stephen Cave about this, he makes the point that yes, it's been floated before, there's merit, but substantial body of work required to pull that together, and he's not proposing it be advanced at this time. If you're signalling that's something that you want to have more detailed examination of over the period of this LTP with a view it might come back in the next one. That's something I think we would welcome your guidance on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't read far. I got so excited in the mid-paragraph, I didn't read to the bottom of the page, which says, staff do not consider this an issue that should be advanced at this time.
And look, it's really just a question, we've got more than enough on our plate, including the good works up at Tutela, and this one looks to me like a really good thing to consider for the next long-term plan. Okay. And we'll have advanced quite a lot of work up at Tutela which will help underpin that.
Unless, of course, opportunities arise in the meantime which we could take advantage of.
Always an annual plan process.
Yeah, because one could.
And if I could just add on to that, there are good networks going on at a park just across the road from the Pakawhai Dog Park, and we've done a bit of tidying up at Waitangi, so it's not as if we've been idle here. We've done some work, we haven't, we'd like to do more, and we've got the camping grounds, we've done some good things, so.
Agreed.
Sorry?
Agreed, we've got lots on.
Yeah, we've got lots of.
Steve's a busy man.
We love to have lots on. Do we have someone to move the recommendation? Thank you, Peter. Seconder. Peter, do you wish to speak?
I don't either.
No, neither. Benton?
There are no regional parks in the north, Chair.
No, we want one. We want one, yeah. We're waiting for the local member to promote the regional park, from the lighthouse to ocean.
The mayor's up for it.
Any other, anyone else wish to speak? We have a mover and a seconder, and everyone's spoken. All those in favour of the recommendation? Aye. Against? It is carried. Really? Boy, people must be getting tired. Number 17. Item 17, strategic planning group activities.
So that's.
I think we need to go.
After we hear a stunning presentation.
We're going to take it as read. Are there any questions for the staff? We've got Tom here.
Give us a presentation.
No, he doesn't. You don't need to, Tom. You can take questions. One from Tom.
Are we supporting the business Hawke's Bay request for $100,000?
So Business Hawke's Bay currently has been receiving $100,000 per annum under a previous funding agreement until Matariki is settled. Our standing arrangement with Business Hawke's Bay is that they'll continue to receive that funding until a new funding model is agreed by all the parties. So if the Matariki funding, in the absence of any increase in that rate or that allocation, if the supporting Matariki requires some funding to be diverted, then that will invariably come off Business Hawke's Bay's funding.
So that is embedded in the budget.
Yeah.
Are we contributing any cash to Matariki at present?
So in the interim period, we have been, along with all councils and central government, been supporting the program manager as someone who has been, was previously Dr. Alistair King. I can't remember if he ever presented here. But there is a role that expires, I believe, at the end of this month, and then there will be no, so our support really is just in-kind time.
Can I ask that Mr. Skirman approach Business Hawke's Bay and explain to them what the purpose of a submission to a council is, and some helpful guidance on what one might want to consider when they make it?
I'll convey that message.
Yes, Neil.
Just a question in regard to the council's commitment to climate change, and I note there's no staff request for funds to deal with that matter, despite it being a significant strategic element for our long-term plan. Are you saying that you can accommodate all of the matters to do with climate change and its various guises within current baselines, and that's how you intend to manage the issue?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So it's an excellent point because it came through in the feedback, and look, I can't recall the actual meeting where this was addressed, but I believe in the business cases that we put forward, we agreed to roll forward continuously. I think a sum of about $24,000 that we use to support climate change. But the thrust of the paper that led to the support of that, which was the Dr. Sean Weaver report, identified, the fact that climate change, and I think the words are, affects everything we do, and it's intrinsic in all our activities, and so that has come through in the LTP process as something I think we need to highlight in our long-term planning, to point to the fact that it is a big part of everyone's core business.
Can I just add on that within the science funding area, we've obviously got ongoing climate-related work, and within the freshwater planning, we've got climate change impact evaluations being undertaken. In the marine space, it's a matter which is also considered in the science program. We've got funding for putting solar onto the roof. We've got solar cars coming through. Obviously our forestry and afforestation activity substantially contributes to that, etc., etc. What we could do is bring together at some point, I think, a whole of organisational picture along the lines of what Dr. Weaver brought forward for some regular reporting to the community about what we're doing in totality in this area.
In that regard, is it worth pulling together a supplementary page for the long-term plan to identify the aggregate of council work in this area?
My preference, just given that we have the auditors here wanting to review the entirety of this in a week's time, would be to bring that to a committee that could then be publicly released and posted on our website, etc., rather than include within the document itself. If that's okay.
And you also carry forward money in the staffing from the oil and gas.
Correct.
We have that here. We're going to deal with that in a minute.
And sustainable homes as well. Yeah. There's a lot that we're doing. Indeed.
Are there any more questions, or do we have a mover to receive and note this? A mover and a seconder. Do you wish to speak? Neil? Anyone else? Okay, all those in favour? Aye. It is carried. So we have item 18, corporate services. Well, we're going to cancel them, aren't we? Jessica, yes, you're on, are you?
So this was a summary of all the feedback that was put into the sort of general bracket, which covered mostly comments regarding the affordability of the proposed rates increase. So I have tried to summarise that within my paper. There were sort of additional comments covering governance and quite a bit of general support for the direction that Council's travelling in, and also some opposition, which would be captured within the submissions attached. In terms of just one comment I'd like to make regarding the rates affordability, particularly for those on fixed incomes, we will certainly respond to each of those submitters individually who requested some advice or queried making regular payment plans to aid pensioners and those on fixed incomes to meet their rate requirements and their rate payments. So Councillor Balford, we will contact the submitter that you mentioned earlier in today's meeting directly and engage with those people. Any questions?
Tom?
A lot of this particular agenda item does summarize some of the core reservations people had about our plan. Could you just remind me what is the planned communication of the outcome here? Is there a document of some kind that is analogous to the short form consultation document, or what will we be putting out that explains what we have decided to do and the rationale for it, and will we have a crack at that?
Desiree's here, so she might be able to provide a bit more context, but as far as I'm aware, all of the submitters who submitted on particular subjects will receive an email thanking them for their submission and notifying them of the resolutions that were made at today's meeting in regards to specific areas or consultation topics that they commented on. And more broadly,
we've got a media statement. So we've got a media statement presently being drafted for today, just in relation to today's decisions, and of course that'll be caveated by the fact that formal adoption will occur on the 27th of June. We could well use, and I think it's probably quite prudent, our periodic, the rates newsletter. Right. So I was also thinking of the community newspapers and the, we could do a page up on that as well, just to communicate the decisions.
And there'll be a section in the final LGFA, which is the key decisions. So we'll summarise what we did for consultation and then what submission points were made and what the key decisions were. So that'll be the front chapter of the final LGFA.
So from an affordability point of view, I think the only thing we could accommodate within existing budgets for every ratepayer would be to wait till the rates invoice goes out in September and include in there, as is the current plan. And then otherwise we'll need to use general media, social media, our website, etc., to communicate the decisions.
Are there any further questions? Peter?
Yeah, just going back to this fixed income thing, do we have some sort of a hardship examination process or policy, or I mean, how do you decide that a person who's on, let's say, New Zealand superannuation can afford $290 but not $330, for instance?
I think all requests for rates remissions are taken on a case-by-case basis, and we certainly don't have any fixed policy regarding those people on fixed incomes currently. And that's something potentially, we did get many submitters requesting that we do look at our policy, and we do look at a specific policy for those on fixed incomes, but we don't have one in place currently.
Where somebody has an affordability issue, as I understand, through the payment plan, we try to get them to ultimately pay what they owe. If it is over an extended period of time, then it triggers the penalty clauses, and then we, on a case-by-case basis, consider relief from those. And just this morning I signed off $23,000 worth of penalties for a range of different reasons, where people had written to us a stack of letters like this. They all have to write to us and make a case, and we give them once every 3 years, we give every ratepayer an opportunity to make the case and have many penalties written off. And look, my observation this morning, having looked at what I signed off, was that we are very socially conscious and particularly flexible to accommodate people for their circumstances.
Are there any more questions? Otherwise, do we have a mover to receive and note the corporate service group activities?
I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Rick. Seconder? Seconder. Paul, do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak, Paul? Does anyone else wish to speak? Otherwise, we will move. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It is moved and accepted.
Go back to civil defence. Civil defence, woohoo!
Well, we could go back to civil defence. We've got 19.
Or we could go to
19.
I actually think we should, because these are quite, these are outside all of these, and they'll all require a bit of discussion. So let's go back to civil defence. The floor is yours, Neil.
Not mine. Yeah, James.
Neil. Look at him.
Civil defence, sorry. Are we going to civil defence?
We've gone back to civil defence, and
so we have some proposed wording on this, which I think Leanne is going to put up shortly.
Where did your wording come from, Neil or Tom?
It's actually 15.
That's all
I'm
good.
happy to.
I'm both actually. Was this a secret committee?
It appears so.
Have you got some words?
Let's put it later.
I noticed Councillor Bevan was going to get cups of teas without the chair's permission, but we'll let it pass.
So, Mr. Chair,
Early smoko break. I'll check with the union about that. Okay.
Mr. Chair, we
Yes, Neil.
before the lunch break, we'd dispatched a previous recommendation, but there is, I think, room for consideration of recommendation 3 previously agrees, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council agrees to take full responsibility for collecting a single regional rate for civil defence as consulted on in the long-term plan, subject to, what have we said there precisely?
It's this one here.
Yeah, no, the other one as well, just 3.1 as well.
The Regional Council's rates invoice clearly stating that there is a savings on TLA rate increases to offset this increased CDM rate, and each TLA providing the Council with a written statement of the amount of their existing expenditure on CDM, the proposed reduction in their rates collection, what they intend to collect from rates. Oh, it's quite long, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, I'm not sure about the wording of that last one.
I'm confused by that.
So it's there's several parts to it. It's what's their existing expenditure, what is the proposed reduction that they're proposing, and what is it they intend to continue to collect by way of rates and the associated activities as part of their long-term plans.
But why don't we just simply say the each TLA provide council written statement showing how much, what effect the transfer to the Hawke's Bay Regional Council has had on the rates and how this is expressed.
Well, I think there would seem to be also an interest in understanding what else they're continuing to do, because they are continuing in both Hastings and Napier's case to continue rating for and funding some emergency management activity.
Well, as it should do, because as was pointed out before, and I've seen this, that if their bridge fails, then they have to fix the bridge. And every council collects money and puts in its balance sheet for those sorts of works. And there's a whole pile of things that they have contingency for and they need to fund it. So that's civil defence work, and they should continue to do it. It's not work we do.
I understand that, but there seemed to be a desire to get some visibility around what the other councils are continuing to collect and
well, we can do that,
undertake.
But I'm not that interested in that. What I'm interested in this is that our thing was we take it on, they reduce the rate. I just want them to have a clear statement saying what they've done to reduce the rate and the effect it's had on their rate, which is a thought with Tom was saying.
While we are on live television and reporters are watching this, and a member of the media has already made requests of the territorial authorities along the lines of our discussion of this morning, and I'll just read you one response, which has already come in as to Hawke's Bay Today. This is Napier City Council. Their savings at our account would be $524,000. And NCC will still collect $60,000 to maintain the Napier Emergency Operations Center capability. The savings of $464,000 has been offset by the rates increase of 5.6 for year one of the long-term plan, which includes expenditure on drinking water safety, water supply improvements, stormwater and wastewater projects, and stage one of the proposed aquatic and aquarium expansions. That's where our civil defense savings is going. To the aquarium. There you go. So this language does not communicate to the public. I don't care what they send us in a letter. What I care about is what they say to their ratepayers they're doing as a consequence of us handing them $400,000 to $500,000 in the case of Napier and $400,000 to $500,000 in the case of Hastings.
I'm with Tom on that. He's got my point exactly.
As long as they communicate that transparently to their constituents.
Which, in the,
happy camper.
Yep.
in the
Then
challenge
say
of,
it. Then say it in there.
That's what I've tried to do before.
Well, can you put some words around that? Or Tom, can you put some words around that?
well, the challenge, how can we, the challenge, I suppose it's a process thing or whatever it is. I mean, can you go back up to 3.1, what we're actually looking at doing? Consultants for subject to. So we're making it subject to the territorial authorities actually doing something for us to keep us happy, aren't we? End of the day? Because we're subject to each TLA providing the council with a written statement, so on and so on.
It should actually be providing the constituents with.
So I don't know whether we can actually go ahead and go out and insist on that and hold everything up in the meantime. Something doesn't seem quite right in making that a subject to. It's almost as if we just have to request each TLA to provide the council with a written statement.
Well, what they've seen as a consequence of this morning is it is indeed held up, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it seems to me a bit of encouragement to be transparent with their constituents is not a major hurdle to overcome to get their hands on this money.
Chair, what I'm dropping around is what's in the 3 long-term plan consultation documents from the 3 councils that have got to that point. Water or district council haven't even started their long-term plan consultation and haven't released their consultation documents yet. So it would be preemptive to suggest that they have not provided clarity.
Which ones from each council?
Sorry, that one there is Hastings with the Civil Defence logo on it. The one with the flowers is Napier City Council, and Central Hawke's Bay is the one with the 2 options on it.
Here we go, Central Space. Brilliant. Yeah, Tom, how does this work for you? Tom? Each TLA advisory ratepayers that as a consequence of the HBRC rate decision, I should put on there, on civil defence, their council rates have been reduced and what direct effect this has had on their rates. Is that what you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
What's the truth? If they decide we'll take the same, we're going to spend it over here, well, fair enough, just be transparent about it. That's all we're asking. Is that all right?
Suits me, as long as it goes up there.
Would it be each ratepayer advisory agreeing to TLA? Sorry, each TLA. Each TLA advisory ratepayers that as a consequence of HBRC's rate decision on civil defence, their council rates have been reduced, and what direct effect this has had on their rates. But, so again, we have to wait for each TLA to do that before.
I actually think we're making too much of a big deal of this, Mr. Chairman. I mean, if we take over a function because we believe it's the right thing to do and they agree it's the right thing to do, if they need to spend money on water improvements, who are we to say you shouldn't spend that money?
So you say they shouldn't, we're just asking them to be clear about it.
Well, it's reasonably clear in these.
I'm sorry, Tom, but there's a difference between saying that has to be, they're having to do it, or requesting. So if we're quite clear that we're requesting each TLA to do that, they can either they can still ignore us or not, but we can't force them to do something they don't want to do.
We can't force them to do it. We can't. Of course we can't. We can also not change any vote from this morning.
Yeah.
It wasn't my view, it wasn't my decision. I don't like it, and I agree with what Alan said, you know. I think we do this for the right reason, not because other people are doing something we don't think is correct or even ethical. I think you heard my rant this morning. It's my very strong view that this is the right thing to do. We should pursue it. I think councillors have made their point that they're not happy, and Neil made it right from the very beginning, and he was never happy that we assumed other people's rate responsibilities. My thoughts were that this civil defence under a single management, under a single rate, which is identified in the rate demand, made it very clear, and I think the message has been well and truly delivered today, and it would be very foolish for us not to proceed with this. So that's my view.
We can still put a note on our rate account.
Yeah, that we have
in relation to that particular line.
We are going to do that. Yeah.
Good.
So it's going to be very clear to the residents of Hawke's Bay that this is very specific for this. In the long-term plan presentations, I went to every meeting, which some of you other councillors did. It came up each time, and it was very clear that we had a 19% total, but it was less 5. And most people got that, and they get that message very clearly, that we are taking responsibility for this, and in the submissions it's overwhelming support for this. So, you know, it's not overwhelming in this council, but it's overwhelming in our...
Mr Chair, I just want to, I mean, this is another opportunity to, with some adjustments to the recommendation lost earlier, to proceed. So whether you want to or you don't. Well,
yeah, you want to send a message to the TLAs that they should tell their constituents that, and I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with that. So if you want to put that up there, great. I think it's...
I'm happy to put it up there, and we can vote on it.
But, well, if it's enough to get Neil across the line, let's put it up there and vote on it. Thank you, Neil.
So we're just waiting on Rich's language.
I've said it to you, Leanne. Yeah, request an Rich TLA advisors.
No,
I
haven't received it, sorry.
As far as I'm concerned. Sorry, I've said it to you, it's just that I pressed send and I forgot that I didn't have him again the inside.
So in it, we want to send a clear message to TLAs that we expect them to inform their ratepayers that they have had a... I'm not sure how we can enforce that, Neil.
We went to all those public forums, and you recall I had a sheet of paper with me from our staff that itemized what the cash savings would be.
Yeah.
Each of the 4 territorials by dint of us taking 5%. All I want the Hastings Council to do is to say, yep, you know, we're a beneficiary of $385,000, whatever the number is, by virtue of this, and here's what we've done with the money. That's all. Sure. That's all I want. That's the easiest vote you'll ever pick up.
They've already done it.
It's not what, the numbers don't agree with our numbers.
Yeah, I'm with Tom on that.
Yeah,
I just think if what Tom has said about the media interest in this, then I say mission achieved already.
Oh, well, that's exactly my point, previous point. But
right.
I'm happy to have it in there. It's up there, rightio.
Chair, Mr MacDonald has confirmed that the funds that are proposed for retention, as identified in these documents, were known about and accounted for, and are not double dipped on, if you like. So it is all net zero in terms of the regional collection of civil defence.
I think that's a bit of formulation. The funds in civil defence rates and have been accounted for. That's all we need to say, that last bit, and have been accounted for. Take out reduced, accounted for. That's a much better formulation.
So just
have been accounted for.
full stop.
Yeah, that's what we want, isn't it?
Okay, Neil, you moving that? Tom, are you going to second it? Rick, will you second it?
Sure.
We have a mover and a second. Neil, do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak? I just want to say...
This is now just tacked on to the original, is that the...
Yeah.
On this?
I do wish to speak. I just want to say thanks to Neil and Rick for finding a solution to this really important issue and really important signal that we send to all the people in Hawke's Bay that we are prepared to take this role for civil defence, because one thing for certain, we will in the next decade have a civil defence crisis. And we need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared from terms of resourcing our people, financially and otherwise. So to get this across the line, I think is a really good thing for our region. I take on board what you say about taking on someone else's rate commitment and them not acknowledging it. It's a bit annoying, but and hopefully this will get over that hurdle. As difficult a hurdle as it is. So thank you very much. Yes.
Say something, Chair, before. I know we've asked requested each territorial authority to state that. Personally, I'm really happy with what Central Hawke's Bay District Council has put out in terms of their disclosure on this particular issue.
Okay. We have mover and seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Central Hawke's Bay and Wire are against. We'll better record that. We need to record it, I think. Okay. Let's move on. Thanks, guys. So we're now doing number 19. Yes.
I've just had a message. I've got to go and get some stuff for my wife.
You know, certainly, Alan.
Cranford.
Yeah.
Could I just make a comment on 19? Just my own personal views. Waiheke is a very progressive marae and community, but I don't believe we should be funding it. It would set a precedent for every other marae in the region, and they're close into Napier and they're part of Hastings, so that's where I believe local government contribution should come from. And Cranford Hospice, very good cause. If we had $2 million spare at the moment in cash, I'd say give it to them, like we did with the museum and sports park and so on some years ago when we had spare cash, but we haven't got it. So I believe we should be last off the block, not first, and if by chance some spare cash comes out of the port transaction, then I believe that would be the time to have a look at that. Those are just my views.
Thank you, Alan. We'll take them on board. I don't think we need to go through this paper. I think it's really clearly, but these are, to say these are extras to our long-term plan. These are things which have come in subsequently. Business Hawke's Bay is not though, is it?
No, Business Hawke's Bay is built in, as is the ongoing funding in Avira schools, which wasn't a funding request from Toimata, but it's just noted in there. So
the ones that add.
Leanne has some further information from Cranford. Is that correct?
Well, we'll get to it quite.
Sorry.
So Business Hawke's Bay. Is everyone happy that that's in the long-term plan now?
Yep.
So Toimata, what is that? Toimata Foundation. The environmental schools, already provided for.
Yep, increased from 0.3 to a full FTE.
Coast Guard, that's in your little list. Coast Guard Eastern Region.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, no, certainly. I want to have a discussion on that now.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm really thinking through the Coast Guard exception. I think there is scope to incorporate, because of its synergy both with the port activities and with our science outputs, there is an opportunity there not to fund per se, but to partner. And I'm wondering whether the Chief Executive might consider partnerships, whether there's a scope within the funding for Partnership for Change to incorporate that cost of up to $10,000 in that baseline, particularly taking into consideration the coastal marine coast expenditures and potential opportunities there for partnership. Is there any comment from Chief Executive on that? Oh, Ian, you.
Look, I could offer some comment just knowing well the capability of the vessel that the Coast Guard have. So our interest would be primarily in the vessel they've got and the work that they could do for us. Where we have used them very successfully for in the past is in our marine pollution response, the oil spill capability, and that's very, very, the vessel is very well set up for that. However, it's not well set up for our scientific investigations, because typically you've got large bits of kit, you need a davit, large deck area, so the vessel isn't really designed for that. But certainly from a marine oil pollution response, there is good value in having a partnership with the Coast Guard for that reason, but I think it'd be a stretch to make it something that we would use routinely for our science work.
Can you describe the synergy with the port?
Well, look, I'd say both harbour master, probably more with harbour master function, but also for the port. So they have this relationship with the port again in relation to spills. The port traffic typically is not a user of Coast Guard, but I think probably, yeah, it's the harbour master functions where there's the closest alignment. And probably, look, of any public authority in the region, we would have the closest responsibility. Set of responsibilities to this outfit, and so I think funding of the nature of what they've asked for would be entirely consistent with our core business and would be appropriate, which is why $10,000 a year.
And typically the most common incident we have from a marine pollution response is in the port as a result of some activity in and around the port.
That's $10,000 a year, guys. What do you think? Yeah, well, it could.
Well, we do have $30,000 annually set aside for attendance by councillors at conferences. We typically underspend that, and we never seem to spend more than 20,000. So.
Oh, we've got some body language from both Paul and Lee there.
Look, Manton, if we added 10,000 to the bottom line, it's rounding error stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
Remove 10,000 a year for the 3 years.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have a second?
Well, we're not having a vote yet. There's a principle here that I think we need to think about, and I'm looking at this and the next one, which are both in relation to funding buildings. And I'm also concerned, as Alan suggested, at the precedent setting that this might get us into. And I think about Mangarawa Marae, where we've made not insignificant contributions, but it was to the landscape as opposed to the building, and I think that's the precedent that we should be thinking about, and I think about that in particular to the Marai request here, and I think that's what we should be exploring with them. And in relation to Cransford, I agree, unless we had... Sorry? Well, because they both involve buildings... So you want me to talk about Cransford only? No. All right, okay, well, I've said my point.
Someone's got to move that they support this. There's no mover, no seconder, there's nothing to discuss.
There's a remover and a seconder. There's nothing to discuss, it falls on. For those reasons. Cranford Hospice. We have some discussion on that.
With regard to what you've written up there, can you clarify resource consent applications? Are you meaning resource consent applications to our council, or because there's obviously applications going into Hastings? So what are you opening yourself up for there?
So just to clarify, that has come from Cranford. They've emailed that through since they presented it yesterday.
Oh, this is from them?
This is from them, yeah.
Oh, that's a sort
Oh,
of...
it's not from me. I'm not that clever. It's got John Butt written all over it too. He's much cleverer than me. So the first point is already in place, isn't it? The liaison agrees the council in kind contributions.
It's a bit of cheek saying who we have as our representative. I think we should go back and say it's our decision.
Well, we've already made that decision.
When?
Oh, a long time ago. Was it? Oh, was it Fenton? It was Fenton. I could just put chair, take out my name, just put chair.
I'm just thinking, it's up to the council to decide who it does itself for. It's a cheek for them to come in and sign and finger it. Of course it's going to be you as a chair, without doubt.
No, it doesn't have to be. I've got enough to work on.
Of course it should be.
Formal discussion between the Crown Foundation. What do you want to do there, team, on the first one then?
Well, I think the question you have to ask yourself here, is there a mover for this? And if it's not, it just lapses.
No, we're talking about point one though.
No, but that's automatic. You're our liaison person regardless.
The second one is agrees the council in kind.
No, switch this off.
Well, wouldn't we assist with the gardens and waterways? The waterways are our responsibility anyway.
Not what they mean.
I could support the second part there if it said, and for resource consent applications to HBRC, which I think is the point you're making, Debbie. It's probably what's intended, but let's clarify. The third one I've got real problems with, because again, that's a lot of money. It's for a building. It's not our core function. I've got a huge amount of sympathy for John. He's a friend of mine, and it's a really.
He used to be a friend of yours.
And this is a really good cause, but I wouldn't be wanting to commit to that until we know we have an endowment or funds that could be allocated for that purpose, and we don't know at this point in time. That's the problem.
Tom, and then back to you, Rick. Tom first.
Well, first of all, I'd like to know whether we even have the authority to commit to this level of support for anything without having publicly consulted on it. Wouldn't it be number one? Number two, to me, this is just transparent double dipping. It's the same ratepayer at the end of the day, and I think Cranford should identify what its public funding support from local government, what they're seeking. They should apportion it however they want to apportion it across the 4 territorial authorities, or the entire amount against us, one or the other, so that everybody knows what's going on, and then ask for the money when they're ready to do that. But right now, this is simply going to the same ratepayers that they're asking Hastings, Napier, Central Hawke's Bay, and Wairua to go to, and asking and putting a hand in the other pocket as well. And I thought we were trying to get out of that business. So from my standpoint, this is a non-starter.
Fenton, and then back to you, Paul.
Well, to be helpful, Chair, I mean, I think Councillor Barker's onto it. If no one's going to move or second that, it lapses. You will be a conduit anyway, and in regard to assisting with waterways, etc., well, it's just an ongoing discussion. So I don't know what we're doing here, but unless someone wants to move that, then we move on. Paul?
Any of these requests that we receive are of concern to me in terms of if we had money in the, as Alan said, if we had money in the pot, that's be a different story, he'd consider them. But I don't believe we should be just waiting for people to come in the door. If we had money in the pot, we shouldn't be waiting for people to come in the door. We should put it out and say, hey, look, we've got some money in the pot. Has anyone got any ideas or got any suggestions we can put it towards so it becomes contestable? We shouldn't, I think this is a bizarre way to consider funding these sort of things.
Do we have a mover? Therefore it lapses.
So, Chair, just before we...
Before you go with that, I do think, though, there was a suggestion that was made, which doesn't need a resolution, that we accept the invitation as a council to go and view the site and have a look at a tour of the grounds and so on, and on the basis of that we might like to come back and have some consideration. Yep. But I also want to say that Peter made the suggestion about assisting them with a resource consent. I'm not comfortable with that, given that we are the consenting authority. You know, we should be independent, and if we're assisting the resource consent, it gives us sends, I think, a bit of a message which I just feel a little uneasy about. That's me.
I think that's a very good suggestion. David? Yeah, okay, we know. With the what, sorry? Okay, we'll just take that on board, James. I'll have to talk to James, and we'll, because I'll definitely have a chat to John, and we'll organise that for something. Okay, then that is all that matters there.
Chair, before we vote, because I think that is the conclusion of
We've
these.
voted already. We voted on what?
No? No?
We voted on it.
I thought we were doing...
I wanted to do it at the end, but I got overridden. We voted on it one at a time.
I'm so used to you having your way.
There was no...
I haven't been getting my way lately.
The Coast Guard was voted on.
Yes, yep.
Yes.
And that one's carried.
But
And subsequent to that, there's been no motion moved.
That's
on
right.
what?
On the floor. There's no motion on the floor.
That's right.
So has Waiheke and...
No motion.
No motion.
Didn't get a mover.
What about to decline?
No, was it?
So there's no...
Well, we need to tell, we need advice then. Are you saying that we need to affirmatively decline a request?
You don't have to. You've been asked for a funding contribution, and you don't.
By
have
default,
to.
there's no change of the plan.
No, that's
with
correct.
all respect.
That's correct.
So
yeah.
we move on.
So you can just move on. The point I was going to just make on the Waiheke option is that if council was in mind to consider a marae to be eligible for the Sustainable Homes program, while it's not a residential property, then things such as their water tanks, septic treatment system, etc., could be funded on a cost recovered basis and recovered from marae through its rates over time. That's right. I mean, at the moment, it's targeted at residential ratepayers, but and I guess the marae falls into the in-between category. With the Papakainga.
Respectfully suggest that to them if they had a problem, but we've had a procedural problem, so I'm sure you come back to council recommendation, we do that.
And look, I'd be more than happy for you to talk to them about their landscaping as well.
Okay.
Okay, so item 20, we're really moving it.
Staff internal submission.
Staff.
So when we reply to Brantford Hospice as a submitter, who has submitted a request, I assume, even though we know there was no mover or whatever, we reply to them in a letter saying, what, we have declined your request, we have...
So,
What do we say? What's the say we got?
well, I don't think we can say that we've declined the request. We can say that the council did not take up your request because there wasn't a motion to decline it. And we'll note the nature of the discussion, that there is an interest and an ongoing discussion on
The council has not approved funds for your request.
The difference with that is the chair will hand deliver the letter. So.
I will, because I think we all acknowledge it's Cranford has been a stunning facility for the people of Hawke's Bay for many years, and you know, I had some personal use of it, and it was just amazing, really. And this new site is going to be phenomenal, perhaps, as John said, the best in the country, and we'd love to support it, but we do not have the surplus capital at the moment, but there may be a time down the future when we do, and I'll certainly discuss that with him personally. So you did right, I will be discussing with him personally on Saturday.
Okay. I would have thought so too on the side of the footy. I'll stand the opposite side of the park to you.
Lindis Farn versus Hastings Boys.
Yeah, no, you can be on one side, I'll be on the other.
He's Irish, actually. Okay, 20. So now this is the carryovers. I recall, and we've done these individually. We want to do these individually. You would have all read them. Is there? Perhaps we should do them individually. What do you?
I think we just do them as a bulk block. Maybe to move the recommendations from 1 to 13, and I want discussion on some. We can discuss them. Not when you've moved, but I mean, you did ask questions. You want some questions? You want to ask some questions? Ask some questions. Just don't go and move along.
Peter, what are your issues?
So firstly, in regard to the very first one, $89,000, given the government's intention to legislate, why are we going to continue with this? Can you explain what the rationale is?
So look, there hasn't been a decision taken at this point by the Regional Planning Committee to cease the work on this. In all probability it will, but that would need to be by agreement with Tangata Whenua through the RPC, because it is RPC initiated work, so we don't yet have that formal resolution. So not wanting to preempt that, and there may be other priorities for the Regional Planning Committee that those funds could be directed towards.
You happy with that answer, Peter?
What you're saying is the money needs to stay on the table in the meantime. Okay.
Yep. That's what I'm saying.
And the other one that I wanted to ask about was number 14, which is the groundwater research, which is Heritonga Plains, and we had funding that we were going to allocate for deep bore work maybe a couple of years ago. This is part of that? Is that right?
No. So there's two parts. One is our call it traditional capital budget for our monitoring bores. So we're playing catch up because we've had a vacant position for close to a year. It's just been filled. Janine's in now and she's designing for us, or she's reviewing the network, and she'll very soon be into establishing new bores. The other one was, yes, we did have a discussion 3 years ago, more around a deep drilling program. Shortly after that, the SkyTeam option became available, which is the effectively ground penetrating radar proposition that's in the long-term plan now. In the development of that, we preempted the potential of securing funding for SkyTeam and certainly getting bulk funding from GNS by putting aside capital this year to roll into the program starting, we thought, for next year, but because of the rejigging of the sequencing of the expenditure on the long-term plan, that's been pushed out by a year, starting in year 2 of the long-term plan. So we want to be able to carry that funding forward into next year, ready for year 2. So it was kind of a pre-positioning to avoid, help smooth the budget. But there was never funding put aside for the deep bore program simply because it was an idea. We had some estimates that we'd brought to you, but we hadn't locked it into any annual long-term plan.
We did this up yesterday.
In effect, this is a replacement for the deep drilling.
Correct. Yep.
Are there any others? You want to move as a bulk?
Yes. Just before we do, Mr Chair, I note that there are a range of carry forwards, but on page 632 there are other amendments required. So the water conservation order is 100,000 additional funding, is that correct? And then we've got biodiversity capital. I'm just struggling to understand what that's about. If you could give me a moment on that.
Yeah, do you want to talk?
Yeah, so sorry, I can talk to the biodiversity capital. So there was an error in the material that was provided to you initially, in as much that we mentioned earlier that the funding of council and the physical spend in biodiversity was $200,000, 200,000 into the endowment and 150,000 into the project management. The $200,000 of project-related spend was $100,000 of external cost and $100,000 of capital cost. So capital cost for things like fencing or things that we could capitalise. What we had missed is that had been put in year one, 100,000, but not carried through the life of the long-term plan. So this just seeks to extend it through the life of the long-term plan to make up the full 200,000 a year.
It was me.
We'll share the responsibility because I should have picked it up as well.
What we are moving here, if you go to that recommendation, we're moving 3 to 13. We're going to move up. And a second, all those in favour? Aye.
Before you move on, we just need a...
We're just seeking clarification whether the 100K for the WCO next year is to be funded by the general rate or through deficit. So whether you'd like us to add it to the general rate funding, which will have an impact on rating, or to find it within cost savings within the rest of the budget. Because it adds to the bottom line. It's another... It's another 0.5%.
For conferences, let's use 20,000 of that for that, and then after the 0.8.
So you'd like us to find it from other cost savings internally?
Yeah, possibly.
Okay.
Okay, we have one other late item that actually comes from one of our own. I don't know why it's late. The response to submitter 606, which is...
Oh!
So, Ian, why have we got this...
Sorry, it's because Desiree realised yesterday when we were going through to double check that we'd covered everything, that there was no officer's response provided for the submission which was lodged under Fenton's name, requesting support for the construction of a stock effluent facility.
I'll speak to it. So, look, that was just to register the fact that that work was going on. I'm surprised it made the cut because it was an hour late. It missed the cut-off by an hour, so very generous CE accompaniment there. It is, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. The 500,000 that was promised is now gone, but because it was an hour late. Really just want to put that on the record that that work is ongoing. I suspect our team will get involved at some stage. There's a little bit of work to do, but I must take my hat off to WDC on that one. They have engaged Opus as a consultant to do some preliminary work. There's a whole lot of willing folk there, including landowners and neighbours and everyone. I just hope we could perhaps, with some expertise at our end, pull it together. So I'm happy with leaving it at that, Chair.
refers the submission to the Regional Transport Committee for consideration. I'll move that. Do we have a seconder? No, we won't have you second it. You'll second. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's the end of our meeting. Well done, guys.
Just